with that, I got a couple of housekeeping items while everybody's getting kind of settled down. First off, a reminder that the interim topics must be submitted to Kelly Lower by Friday, February 24th. That form can be found online. Did you get it? Everybody see it online? Okay. Okay. All righty. And next we have a couple people on Zoom that are going to testify. And with that, Diana, would you please take the roll?
Yes, sir. Representative Allred.
Here.
Representative Andrew.
Here.
Representative Berger.
Here.
Representative Brown.
I'm here.
Representative Clauston.
Here.
Representative Lawley.
Here.
Representative Obermuller.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Chairman Northrup.
Here. All right, first up will be Senate File 84. Senator Ellis, how are you doing? Welcome to the House Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Affie Ellis and I represent Senate District 8 here in Cheyenne. And for those of you who are new to the committee and new to the legislature, I'm going to spare you, I'm not joking, hundreds of hours of work that has gone on to amending our absenteeism laws. For those of you who have been working on this, you know this has been an ongoing discussion for our committee. When a student's absence, I think we all generally recognize that there's learning loss. And we've had a lot of conversations about whether or not a student's absence is due to their own fault or whether or not it's their parents' fault. And when it's their parents' fault, then, you know, there are other agencies such as the Department of Family Service that can get involved through Title 14. But our statutes prior to that didn't draw a distinction. So we had people who were showing up to school, you know, parents dropping their kids off school, kids cutting school, and then the parents being referred to district court. So in Wyoming, we do take these things seriously when kids don't show up because it might be a sign of child neglect or further abuse. So in doing all of this work, we've added definitions, you know, defining who is a habitual truant versus, you know, a parent that is willfully making their kids absent. And some of that required extensive look at our relationship with our tribes, you know, where a child resides might implicate whether or not tribal court's appropriate. So I just want to provide you that backdrop that this has consumed hours and hours and hours of our time. As a parent, though, I have seen some of the deficiencies in absenteeism policies firsthand. And a few years ago, my mother-in-law passed. She was in hospice. She hadn't been well. We had family coming into town. I have 3 kids. I called all of their schools, explained the situation that my kids were going to be spending the last days of her life with her. And only found out, I received the letter from my school district saying, sorry, because she hadn't died and she was in hospice, that didn't count toward our district's absenteeism policy. In Laramie County and like other counties across Wyoming, the district's policies are pretty stringent. They say if you have a certain number of unexcused absences, that your case will be referred to the district attorney, who then may exercise discretion of whether or not to prosecute your case as a misdemeanor. So I was pretty upset, you know, and called and explained every morning to each school, you know, the situation. But as I talk to parents, what ends up happening when you have district policies that aren't well thought out, it really encourages parents to lie to their district rather than to be truthful. So after we've done all this work to change our statutes and laws earlier this year, at the end of last year, I had a travel opportunity where I could use some miles. I was traveling for a conference, could take my kids to some really educational events. So a month in advance, I called my kids' schools and said, you know, we're going to be gone. Can I make arrangements for them to make up their work, take tests in advance, or work with me? And again, was told, sorry, those are unexcused absences. So I think there are some districts out there who have like a very realistic view of how absenteeism policy should work, but my district, unfortunately, I don't think has. I've been in touch with my district for years, requesting committees to be brought together to adopt their policy, to change their policy, and my efforts have been really unfruitful. So as we were finishing up our conversation about absenteeism in the interim, it became apparent to me that one great solution might be this, is asking the state superintendent to develop model rules and policies for student attendance to include definitions. As I mentioned, unexcused absence is kind of the umbrella term, but the difference between a habitual truant and willful absenteeism for all students who are attending public schools. And then I also want to clarify, no district shall be required to adopt any part of the model rules or policies developed by the state superintendent. Mr. Chairman, I do think there are districts out there that are kind of grounded in some of this reality. They want to encourage parental, you know, communication. Unfortunately, I don't think my district's very far along in that. So as a parent, I'm left with 0 options of how to approach the district. It would be incredibly helpful for any concerned parent or student or family to be able to say, you know, here are some policies that might work, and then let the districts adopt those, modify those per local control as they see fit. So that's the first part of the bill, Mr. Chairman. And I, have a copy of my district's policies, and they're pretty straightforward. I mean, the only thing that's considered excused is a death or serious illness in the family. It says specifically, hunting is not an approved absence, vacations. And so, I know that this committee has had some conversations about attending state fair events. I'd also note that my district's very clear, and it says if a student is participating in a school-sponsored activity, those are excused absences. But in Laramie County, we have a number of kids who are participating in all kinds of non-sponsored school activities, robotics, traveling for, ski things. And so what this bill would do is hopefully allow those parents to petition their school board to change their policies, to give these kids who are doing amazing things outside the school district really the same level of parity that the school district sponsored students have. And it really requires working with teachers. And so anyway, I'm happy to provide you a copy of my district's policy, but in doing a quick survey of what's out there in Wyoming, there are districts out here who have that, who need a little help with policy revision. So I think this could be an important tool. The second part of this bill, though, would amend the duties of the boards of trustees, and it would clarify that absences requested by the student's parent, guardian, or custodian in writing that do not significantly affect the student's academic performance or an absence for a student's mental health shall not constitute an excused absence. You'll see that we looked at this definition a lot in past years. It says, things like the student's illness, a death in the family. We've had conversations about participating in the state fair. You'll see that existing language on page 3, line 2. Committee members, I just ask that if we're going to recognize the value of the state fair, we should recognize the value of giving parents the ability to get absences pre-approved. Certainly, if a student isn't performing or the school has concerns about their performance, it might be appropriate for them to deny some of those requests. And so that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. And the Senate side, if you looked at the introduced version, it would ask the Department of Education to develop these model policies by July 1st. We heard testimony on the Senate side that December might be in a more appropriate timeframe. I thought that was a good amendment simply because I think it's important to get these model policies right first rather than get them done fast. So I thought that was a very positive development. And then I just ask on the mental health piece, I have a person in the audience who brought this concern to my attention. She will discuss her situation more completely, but this really is something that's out there, not just in Laramie County, but beyond. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And to my recollection, no one testified in opposition to this bill on the Senate side when we heard it.
Hey, Senator Ellis. Would anybody like to ask a question to Senator Ellis? Senator Ellis, I'll ask a question. So when you're talking about mental health, how many days in a year before a guidance counselor or somebody should intervene with that? I mean, I understand everybody has the bad days. So if a bad day is 1 or 2 times a year, it's not an issue. But when it gets to be 8, 9 times a year, is that an issue? Does that signify that there's more going on than just having a bad day?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the goal of this bill is to have really open lines of communication between parents and the school district. And that's why there's that caveat language that it has to affect student performance. If a student is performing at a high level, is getting lots of interventions and support at home, but maybe is dealing with the death of a family member, and it goes beyond having a bad day, quote unquote. I think that our districts, after the COVID experience that we've had of providing learning opportunities remotely and just kind of working on how you provide that instruction, that can be accomplished in there. Certainly if there are other indicators or signs that the student's struggling, you don't have that communication with the parent. I definitely think that more state interventions and district interventions probably appropriate.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you. Senator Ellis, you have put so much time and effort into these particular issues, and it originally started with your work with the Tribal Relations Committee, and it has since morphed into what I tend to see as more maybe of a personal issue of what you're starting to see in this particular district. And so I get a little concerned that when we start bringing up these things, that we start letting maybe the blinders go on. But my particular question is, when we go into the 21.3.110 and we say that a absence is requested by the student's parent or guardian that do not significantly affect the student's academic performance. How do we know whether or not that's going to affect the student's academic performance? Until they're out of the classroom, we don't know if that's affected what they're going to be doing or whether or not, them coming back in and missing, let's say 2 weeks. In your case where your child was up in Jackson for an extended amount of time coming back and they may be in a completely different realm. We wouldn't have known that that was going to affect them. So I guess what I'm confused by is how do we know what will or will not significantly affect a student's performance?
Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I think that's why the request has to be in writing. And if one of the conditions for the absence is that the work or the testing has to be done beforehand, then you would know. But we didn't want to get, in drafting this bill, didn't want to get too prescriptive. And I wouldn't say this is a personal vendetta. I'm using my examples, but when I talk to my friends, a lot of them take time off for family vacations that don't align well with the spring break schedule and that do amazing trips. And so what ends up happening, and I hear this time and again, instead of calling the district and saying, Mike, we're going to be gone for this absence, what can we do to make sure my kid doesn't fall behind? They don't want to be getting the nasty letter. They don't want to be referred to prosecution. So they just call the district and say, my child is sick. So that we've created a perverse incentive for families to address those trips and learning opportunities that come up. It's easier for those families to just lie to the district. And I just think we're setting a horrible example for kids. We should be saying, in the job setting, hey, I need to be gone from work these days. Who's going to cover my shift instead of, well, I'll just skip work and call in sick. So that's the impetus behind this. I'm using my examples, but I can tell you as a parent, I hear about this all the time. It's just easier to call in sick.
Don't follow up, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I respect that, Senator. I don't mean to accuse you of doing this on a personal vendetta issue here, but I also worry about putting this particular language into statute that we're going to an absence pre-approved by the district. We're saying that then it must be a pre-approved absence when it's requested by a student's parent or guardian with the student's academic performance not being at risk. When we say that, it's now state law protecting the parent and saying, I can just write a pre-approved absence and my child's going to be fine. I worry about that and taking that type of local autonomy away from the local school board. So I guess my biggest question is I know you've worked hard with the school district. What has the school board said or school board members said that made you go to, we need to take this ability away from the school board and put it into state law?
Senator Ellis. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think if you look at our district's policy, which is lengthy, and I'm happy to get into this with you. I wrote an extensive letter years ago explaining some of this. This is a response to a lot of parental control issues. What we kept hearing when we were trying to work on this district's particular policy was, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? So what this bill does is it does require some model policy. And if we wanted to tighten up the language a little bit, I think that, you being a co-sponsor on this bill, I'm sure if we could find some ways of strengthening and saying and making it clear that the district does have some discretion to deny requests, that it's not a carte blanche. But we have not moved the ball on this issue enough. We have for years, and I'm not exaggerating this, I work on the billable hour. This has consumed hundreds and hundreds of hours of my time. I felt like this was the last piece necessary to get it across the finish line when districts really don't have the opportunity to, or when they deny requests for a look at changing policy. Just adding that in there, I think would prompt some action by districts to get there. And so, like I said, happy to think about an amendment that might strike that balance that say if there are concerns, that we can address those. But I just think we need to nudge a little bit harder.
Thank you.
Further concerns from committee? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
So why adopt policy that we're not required to make these districts adopt these model rules? I'm thinking, why make this change if schools don't have to really follow it, right? That's what.
Go ahead. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger. Point well taken. I've served on the Education Committee for 6 years, and I think my experience has been anytime you tell the districts, these are the policies you shall do, the largest echo you're going to hear is no, 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 local control. So I am trying to thread the needle on that. And I should say I did receive an email from one school district who said our policy actually aligns really well with what we think you're getting after. And I said, good for you. Good job. So there are districts out there who I think, again, are grounded in reality, who look at parental circumstances, you know, and it is unfair. Like Laramie County is the largest school district. I have no doubt there are parents who are going to abuse policies. This has been my complaint with our absenteeism situation all along, though. Because we have such big blanket rules, we are sending letters out and including a large number of parents who aren't child neglect parents. They are parents who are trying to take their kids on educational opportunities, who are trying to work with the district. And when we cover all of those families, we're not prioritizing those instances where there are kids, where there are signs of true neglect. So right now, you know, you can send out 50 letters in Laramie 1, for example. And then if the district just has these policies where they're not really looking at what's happening with the kids, the circumstances why they're gone, they can just say, well, we've sent the letter, we're doing our job, check. I think what we're trying to achieve in the broader picture is we're not worried about the Ellis kids, you know, take them off the list. Lots of parents probably take them off the list. Who should we be looking at? Who are the kids in this community that need the help, that need the intervention, that need family services involvement? And I can tell you that's a large number. So there is a dual side of this. It is, let's stop penalizing parents for trying to be parents. Let's focus on families that need it and kids that need it. And, you know, if you look back at the work we've done on this, one of the big conversation pieces we had was the appropriateness of dragging people to court and referring them to prosecution. We have really looked at that and said, that's not the appropriate response. If you try and look at imprisonment, we had a huge number of days in there where it didn't make sense. How does, you know, putting a mom or dad in jail help get the kid to school? You know, and then the fines were between $5 and $25. So then on one hand, some people are like, well, that's not high enough. And there's like, these are too low. One of the districts testified, this is absurd. This is a mockery. I have taken all of this to heart. So we changed all of that in the last few years to say, no, what kind of interventions do you need with the Department of Family Services that can get your kids to school? How do we help, not punish? So to me, this isn't just about helping families like mine. This is also about really focusing on the families that need it and the kids that need it.
Representative Overmuller had a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Despite what you just described, it just has a feel of a kind of a rich kid, poor kid sort of a piece here, that access to time off for special trips and alternative educational experiences leans to the side of rich families and that there'll be more access. How do you respond to that?
Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to respond to that. You know, the language is the language, and you know how it feels, I don't know. All I can say is, you know, as a parent who kind of lives this and has received the letter saying, you know, we might refer you to prosecution, it just seems like it's overkill on the part of our district. And, you know, you'll call the school and you'll say, you know, I think that schools know which parents are involved and which ones aren't. And to that point, I think like if we develop the model policies and you start having those conversations with teachers, and that's been my experience, there are definitely families, I think, who use the current system right now. There's abuse in the current system right now of, you know, but it's always, I'm just going to call in sick. And so we're just trying to get away. You know, if you have a better tool to achieve that, I'm all ears. But again, this is just something I've been thinking about and working about for a long, long time. And I'd say that in a prior reiteration of the absenteeism bills that we worked on years ago, I had talked to the School Board Association about this very issue about, are we rewarding the kids with high academic performance or not? Maybe that's not the best metric. I can concede that. But I was trying to find a way to tighten that up. And that was one suggestion that had been offered by the School Board Association years ago, probably 3 years ago when I'd been working on this. So it was something I pulled out of frustration that we haven't made any progress in changing some policies across Wyoming that need it.
Further questions? I'm sorry, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ellis, the rigidity of the policy is really what we're talking about, and the outcomes of that. So in my experience, in that rigidity leads to completely different outcomes in different situations. And that concerns me that in one situation, because of the rigidity of the policy, I can have a teacher who will not really look at whether the absence is excused or not. She will work with that student and provide what's needed for that student to do what the family is wanting to do or is needed and work with them to be academically successful. Other teachers are honestly afraid. If it's an unexcused absence, they feel that they can't really intervene, that there's a line there, whether it's really there or not, I don't know, but that's been my experience. Do you see opening up this gives a little bit of a signal and a little bit of flexibility to respond to these situations, but not have these really different outcomes depending on the teacher, the district, the whatever the principal of that particular school? Because that concerns me is where we're having with rigidity, so many different outcomes. And again, the issue of the parent choice. What role does a parent get to have in making some of these decisions about what's best for their child?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think these rigid policies I think it's, the example of if you make everything a priority, nothing's a priority. So if you make everyone guilty as an offender with these unexcused absences, then it really means nothing. To me, that's kind of where my district's at, is there's so many of these people that get this letter, it almost means nothing anymore. And certainly when I talk to families that get it, they're like, whatever, and they throw it in the garbage because they know that our district's not going to take them to prosecution. So we've lost the whole focus of why these are intertwined with Title 14. And so, to the extent that I've categorized this as a rich kid, poor kid thing, I apologize. I'm just trying to really shine a light on my experience as a parent. I also add, one thing that troubles me again about my district's policy, but others, is it doesn't excuse things like hunting. I think if you talk to a lot of families, hunting is a really important activity that's done as a family. It teaches incredible lessons about stewardship. It's something we value in Wyoming. But my district specifically says no hunting, that doesn't count. So what happens? You have families who are like, that's neat, but I'm still going to take my kids hunting. So instead of calling the district and saying, let's, work this out ahead of time, get pre-approval, and I'm not saying anyone should get away out of this. If the condition is my kids have to have all their work done before, that's fine. And if they don't do that, then they're unexcused. That's fine. That's accountability to me. But it's just the rigidness that's producing the results. So it's let's just call in sick when everybody knows they went hunting that weekend. And so rather than try and develop the laundry list, that's what I'm trying to do here, is not have the laundry list of what we've been doing. State fair's okay. Well, what about robotics? What about, and we start going down the list. So, that's why the language is worded the way it is. It's broad. It's to try and protect some local control, but the rigidness of our policies I think have made these policies somewhat meaningless.
Further questions? Representative Berger has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, do you think the best policy could just go back to the old black and white? You're either absent or you're not absent. What do you think of that?
Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think then we're going to miss those very kids that probably need some interventions, those that are missing school because it's a sign of child neglect. When we did the absenteeism bills years ago, they're intertwined with Title 14. So we took them initially in one chunk, and then there was criticism that I didn't do it all, and there was criticism I did too much. So there was a big bill a few years ago that really intertwined how this works with Title 14.
One last, I know.
Go ahead, follow up.
Sorry, follow up. One last comment towards hunting and districts kind of look at their calendar. Is there unique ways you feel that there's unique ways to develop your district calendar and hopefully get community input and how you develop calendars and where you put in spring breaks and how long you go for spring break or fall breaks? We do a thing called a fall break, and it's really tremendously helped out kids being in school. I will say to this, we value kids being at school, and that's one thing that we do in our district. What do you think about encouraging districts to, again, develop those calendars around those days where we know that kids are going to be gone a lot?
Senator Ellis, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger, I think calendars are really important. I think the hard part with Wyoming though is, some things need to align to some degree, right? You've got sports calendars. So, if Cheyenne's doing one thing, our kids travel to Laramie? Blah, 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 blah. So I don't want to upset the apple cart too much, but I just want to emphasize that I think after COVID and all the learning that was done at home, families are looking for a little more flexibility in that you might have some student who is grieving the loss of a loved one. And this is testimony you will hear, and something we heard a lot in working on this in the tribal relations context. How do we start breaking down these barriers? I think the notion that kids need to be in their desks and learning is critical. However, that sitting in the desk, literally in the building, has changed for a lot of people. It has evolved into, how do I sit at my desk, but in my house and be accountable for my work? And I think all the districts are going through that. So that's why this, I think, has got like some great potential in asking for the model policy. How can the department tease out some of those issues so that you're recognizing that being at your desk doesn't necessarily mean physically being at your desk if you're accountable on the other side of it. And that's just the workplace we live in. So I think there's just, I think that's could produce a lot of good. And again, the first part of it, nothing mandatory. I really want to respect that. It's up to parents who are experiencing these problems. If they call me and say my district's, policy isn't great, I'm not going to swoop in there and tell them, here's some model policy. You look at it and you visit with your school board members. And that's what I'm looking for, is the opportunity to visit with my school board members on how we can get there. But I don't know that they're all volunteer people that serve on the boards. This is tricky, as I mentioned, with seat time and virtual learning. So that's why we're asking the department to look at some of these issues and come up with models that work and then maybe don't work for some communities.
Representative Overman, you have one last question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. On the issue of coming on this part about not significantly affecting the student's academic performance. So I'm thinking about the burden it places on instructors and teachers to present to every child and parent that comes forward with a lesson plan to, I believe you stated earlier, that they could provide a lesson plan in advance so that they could turn in all the homework. How do you think about that burden that's placed on teachers by having to make these plans for students?
Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way this is written, the goal is to not necessarily require that. If the teacher wants to require that to ensure that the student isn't going to fall behind, then that might be a necessary piece of it. I think when you talk to districts that are doing it the right way, when I was growing up, this was never an issue. I remember being gone once for a week-long thing, and I had lesson plans, a packet that I took with me as a kid. I don't remember it being this difficult. And in the instance I just mentioned to you, I did contact my kid's school and I said, we were going to be gone a week. Do you want her to have all her work done beforehand? Do you want to test in advance? The teacher was like, no, here's the packet, go on your merry way. And then we returned the packet when she got back. So it's really more, we're trying to build in that flexibility if we have to, if there is that concern, or if the school district's like, we're getting flooded with these requests, we don't like them, the work needs to be done in advance. That's something they can do, but don't have to do.
All right. Anybody else have any
Yeah,
questions?
one more.
I understand.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
asking down at the other end.
That's okay. That's-
Are you all right? Want to ask it? Go
I
ahead,
do.
Representative Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I was back in that day and I also remember that, but I also do remember not having to be held so accountable with testing. And now today as a teacher, and the accountability piece is huge, and being tied to test scores and being tied to those things from the state is very important. So when we talk as teachers, having our students in the classroom is a big deal. So could you maybe talk towards maybe accountability on testing as well as change? You feel that?
Senator Ellis, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think times are different now. Absolutely. But I don't think that this is going to pose necessarily the big burden. I mean, what we're trying to again accomplish is the proactive communication with parents and school districts rather than the reactive. When I talk to my friends who teach, and there are many of them, I say, is it when a kid calls in sick and they, they're maybe going on a trip. They're going hunting. They're like, I just wish they would call me in advance so we could sort this out and have the packet or the communication, and that the parents are invested in the outcome of the student. But without policies that make sense and don't create perverse incentives, the incentive then is, I'm just going to call in sick, and then the kids fall behind. So when that happens, then you have kids falling behind, and then the work is on the back end of catching up those kids that were missing class, or penalizing them by making them take tests that they're not ready to take and having their grades suffer. So this to me is a pro-teacher bill of how it could work better. And for those teachers that are working with kids, there is a huge disconnect in large districts in particular, I'd say, between some of the attendance officer policies in the larger schools, not so much at the elementary level, and the teacher. If you ask teachers, who are the kids you're worried about that are missing school because you think something bad is going on at home? They know that. Who are the kids? Are you worried about this kid and their family life? They're gone. No, not worried about it. So I do think that this is, in my view, a very pro-teacher, helps with accountability on whatever schedule that needs to be, either in advance or in the back end or during the kid's absence.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to public comment. Does anybody from the department wish to comment on this bill? Okay, any elected officials wish to comment? All right, then we'll open it up to the public. Anybody, and I understand there's some people on Zoom. Can you start them into the room so we can hear them? Anybody in the audience like to please come up? Remember to state your name and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Molly Allen and I represent myself. I'm a sophomore attending Burns Senior High School, and I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you today. Last year, I experienced the loss of my brother to suicide. I watched my family grieve along with our community and especially my school. There have been 2 suicides since and many other traumatic incidents, and that's only in my district. I believe that this bill will give students the opportunity to process their feelings without being penalized. This will also allow counselors to become aware of students that may be struggling. As I'm sure you're all aware, our nation struggles with mental health issues. Wyoming is at the top of that list. In our school, there's a large stigma surrounding not only the mere discussion of mental health, but also the necessity for students to prioritize their own mental health needs. The school staff and administration prioritizes physical health over mental health, which causes additional anxiety and furthers the discomfort and stress for students already suffering. This paradox exists not because the adults in our schools lack a sympathy for the students' mental well-being, rather, the legal duties and policies handed down by the state bind them in this issue. This bill will allow for mental and behavioral health days to be counted as excused absences, and it will allow parents to become aware of issues that their child may be struggling with. Thank you.
anybody have questions for Molly? Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you. Molly, thank you so much. And I'm very sorry to hear about your brother, but I want to tell you, I'm incredibly proud for you to stand here today or sit here today and explain the impact of what has occurred to you and how our state laws have impacted somebody like yourself. It's incredibly impressive to see you sitting up here and giving us your testimony. Thank you.
I echo that also, Molly. It's really nice that you're here. I'm really, I don't know if at least I couldn't be in your shoes and be in this presence right now and having had gone through what you've done. So kudos to you. Thank you. You have some people in, anybody else? Please fill the chairs. Come on up, Bill. We just will fill the chairs and we can proceed a little faster. We have one more bill behind this one.
Mr. Chairman, Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association. The School Boards Association does not have a problem with putting together the model policies. Again, I would go back to statute on page 2, starting at line 9, statute 21.3.110, duties of the board. I believe that that would be better to be put into that model policy. Again, I think that our local school boards that are closest to each one of the issues should probably be in charge of that. They're in charge of the accountability for all of those students for academic achievement. They're also required by statute that if a student misses more than 10 consecutive days, we have to drop them because of funding reasons. So I think there's a lot of issues that wind into that. And I do believe that I know the 3 districts that I've been in would be happy to visit with parents about policies and working with them on different policies that need to be changed or need to be worked. But I think if we're gonna if we want to put in some of that language, I think that the state superintendent should be able to put that into a model policy that's not required by every single district out there. I think we heard some testimony that some districts are doing a really good job with that already. With that, I'll answer questions.
Questions for Boyd Brown? Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, I'm looking at what happens when we have to notice a district attorney, I guess. So this is different part of statute, so I won't make you tell me what it is, but perhaps maybe you could kind of walk me through what that looks like once we've just made that decision, because we're gonna probably need to do a reviser's bill on 21-4-107, just because it's.
Yeah, and I would, and I think that that's just changed recently too. And from memory, I would tell you that at one point, when a student got to a specific amount of unexcused absences, you first you had the conversation with parents, required to do a letter to parents as well. When it got to the next specific number, you were required to turn it into the county attorney, and then the county attorney had the option of what they would do. Now, being in 3 different districts, all 3 district or county attorneys dealt with that in different fashions. Some of them felt like they were way overloaded and didn't deal with it at all. Some dealt with it on an individual basis, and some of them had pretty strict ways of the way the county attorney would deal with it.
Further questions for Dr. Brown? Thank you, sir.
I do have a question for you.
Okay, one more. Dr. Brown. Boyd, one more question. It just came out of nowhere. Go ahead. Representative Obermuller, go ahead.
I was trying to get out of there before Representative Brown got back. I know he always has a question. Sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
Representative Obermuller.
right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here comes the stealth question. But you've talked about developing the model rules, but just wanted you to weigh in on this lower section regarding the requests for absences of students. I mean, you've had a lot of experience with this kind of thing. How do you see? Tell us what your thoughts are on this second section.
So,
Go ahead, Dr. Brown.
Chairman Northrup, Representative Obermuller, I guess my view on that would be that we would take all of that and delete that, and that would be in that model policy rather than changing the statute at this time. I think if we're going to develop a model policy through the Department of Ed, that some of that could be wrapped in there, or the group of people that are putting that model policy together could put that in there. I think that trying to wrap in changing the statute currently and then trying to put model policy together, I don't think match. So I would just say, let's take out the 23 or 21.3.110 all the way down to page 3, line 8. I would take that out, and that if that's something that needed to be in the model policy, that would be where it would come in.
Yeah, thank you.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman? No, I'm just kidding.
Mr. Chairman, yes, Representative Brown.
Mr. Winnie, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I got a couple things to talk about. The first thing has to do with making room for some things that are going on in a family. I remember circa 1964 when my sister was going to graduate from college, and a couple days drive away from where we were living, my family wanted to take me out of school, wrote a letter to the school They said, well, it's going to be an unexcused absence. Ultimately, they did, and it didn't hurt me. But there ought to be a policy that allows for certain important things in a family, like graduation, in this case of an older sister, that would in fact build upon education. Second thing I'd bring up is, as a commanding officer, I served as commanding officer for 5 years, active duty in the Navy. And when I faced questions of mental health or physical health for that matter, you go talk to the doctors. This young woman that was here a little bit ago, that's not only a significant thing in the life of the family, but if there is a medical issue, be it mental or physical, you just go talk to the doctors and let them answer the question. In the larger ship I commanded, I had a medical department. I'd just sit down and I call the doctor in and say, okay, what do we do about? And they would tell you, and you just go do it that way. So the system needs to make room for that too. And so I support the bill. I think the Wyoming Department of Education should come out with some kind of a model so that school districts, school boards can go from there. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Winnie? Thank you, sir. On Zoom, I know we have some people, so.
Mr. Thomas, whenever you are ready, we are ready for you.
Thank you, Chairman Northrup, members of the Education Committee. I appreciate this opportunity to address you today. Superintendent of Uintah County School District for about 15 years. I've been an administrator in this district for almost 28 years. I'm certainly an advocate for attendance of students. It's one of the greatest impacts on students' learning and advancement is their ability to attend school. As I read through this legislation, I can understand the need, but maybe on the other side of the coin, I think we have a very good policy in Uintah County. It takes into consideration our students, our families, and student needs. So we do have an exception for family emergencies, which would take into consideration all mental health issues, deaths in families, and we're very understanding. Even the definitions I'm okay with if you create model policies, but where we suffer are those habitually absent students, where we can get no support from statute law. The idea of a 10-day jail sentence for educational neglect, you're right, does not work. A $25 fine for educational neglect does not work. Yet we continue to have students that miss 15 to 45 days every year, and we can get no support. We try everything, home visits, everything I can imagine. We try to get those parents notified and helped and support. The idea that this statute change potentially gives parents, especially those parents who are not sending their kids to school, more opportunities to make excuses for their children's attendance will not help us. It'll just add more issues. We already have in our policies the idea that we do not send to a county attorney anyone that has missed school where attendance is not affected their academic performance. We already do that. But yet by law, we're required, our attendance officers are required to notify parents. So we notify parents at 5, 10, and 15 absences. And I would hope that those letters, the notification fulfilling state law, are not nasty. They're informational. I can tell you, again, in my experience, I took my kids to Washington, D.C. for a week, probably one of the most educational thing I did, but I got a 5-day letter and I was okay with that. But the responsibility to notify me as a parent that my kids were missing school does not change. The help that we need in school districts is what do we do for those habitually absent kids that we can get no support. I can tell you probably in the last 15 years, Uintah County has suggested legislation to look at compulsory attendance laws to improve the younger end of compulsory attendance. We have first graders who miss 35 to 50 days and we can do nothing because they turned 7 during that first grade year. Of course, like everyone else, we have 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. The county attorney will not even accept the letters for those because they're outside the range of compulsory attendance. I guess more than anything else, what I'm asking is Is a statute change needed? I don't believe so. Do we need answers in terms of the habitually absent students? Man, we sure do. And we could use every bit of help that can be given through the law. I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't know if I have any answers for those families who don't send their kids to school. All we can do is continue to encourage, but those kids are the ones that are missing out. Significant chunks of their education is lost because parents, for whatever reason, do not send their kids to school. So Chairman Northrup, members of the committee, I appreciate your attention to this issue. And I'm open for any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Thomas? Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, go ahead, Representative Berger.
Hi, Mr. Thomas.
Hey, Mr. Berger, Representative Berger.
Anybody else? Did you have anybody else online?
We have Laura Pearson. I invited her to join as a panelist, but she has not accepted it. So I'm not sure what you would like to do about that.
All right, well, Ms. Pearson, if you'd like to join, you have to accept it. If not, we'll move on. Anybody else for public comment? Going once? Twice? All right, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what is your pleasure on the bill? Moved by Mr. Brown, or I'm sorry, Representative Brown, seconded by Representative Provenza. Senator, please come forward.
Chairman, I want to get back to you just to kind of circle up on some of the things we heard. I do think that the comments we just heard from the superintendent are reasons why I brought this bill. I did look at Uinta, and he was the person who sent me the email. That was their caveat, was academic performance. So here you had a superintendent who said that that's their measure, and then that's in the bill, but now there's concern there's not. These are really challenging issues, but I think that this legislation is necessary to get after what the superintendent just said. He just said he got a letter for taking his kids to Washington, D.C. As a parent, I just want to say, I got it. I called the district. We're going to Washington, D.C. You don't need to send me a letter. Do they need to send letters for habitual truants? Sure. My kids skipped school. I didn't know that. Whoa. So that's why we had extensive discussions in prior years about distinguishing between who a habitual truant it is when it's the student's fault versus the willful absenteeism where it's the parent's fault. What we're trying to do is better flag those students who are cutting class and those parents that are willfully keeping their kids from school. As for this creating more opportunities to make excuses, I understand that argument, but I just don't think it's going to happen. For those families who are gaming the system already, they're going to continue to game it. This is a way to try and thin that list down so that you can start seeing and making it more difficult for those families who don't value education, who are playing games with the system, from the school districts actually targeting them for intervention. So the point also about the 10-day sentencing, we changed our absenteeism law significantly. It used to be 10 days, and I think some of this is for purposes of ADM. Districts are allowed to set those days now by policy. I don't think a lot of districts are aware of all the changes we made to the absenteeism statutes. You'll recall that the 10-day imprisonment, $5 to $25 fine, we did away with that because we thought it was just unworkable. So now it's supposed to be referred to the Department of Family Services for more intervention. So as I work on this, I visit with district leaders across the state, and I think they're even unaware that we made some pretty significant changes, and that just illustrated that. So to me, this is a cleanup bill. This is one that protects families. I think if we want to rework the language, that's very appropriate, but I'd want to add one thing. We heard testimony from a young lady who experienced a profound loss in her life. And this generation's different than ours. I think they're much more open and willing to talk about mental health. When we go to the doctor and you break a foot, you have a cast on, people recognize that you needed medical intervention. The same should be true for mental health. So I would just caution in eliminating that word altogether from the statute, because we're trying to destigmatize the need for kids to reach out and get help from professionals. So when they see the word mental health in our statutes and know it's a protected activity, the same as protecting your participation in the state fair, to me, please don't delete that important distinction that that's a valid medical thing that our kids are asking for. And in this generation, I think they deserve it. I think we all deserve it, but I'm an old lady. So anyway, the last thing I'd add is don't forget the context of the larger bill. On page 3, lines 6, 7, and 8, nothing in this paragraph shall prohibit a school district from requesting verification of the reasons of the absence. If you have parents who are lying, if you have teachers that say this isn't passing the smell test, we can bolster that language too. But this really is a goal of like finding, people that need help, this kids that need help, and stop sending out letters to people who don't need it. Thank you.
Right, go ahead, Representative Brown.
Can I start making some amendments?
Well, please do.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a couple in a quick motion here to try to speed us along.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go to page 2, line 19. After needs, it'll say healthcare needs. We will insert a comma and write including mental health, comma. We'll just make that as motion 1, Mr. Chairman. I'll explain the rest as we get moving. But I'll need a second.
He needs a second. Okay, Representative Provenza second, moved by Brown, seconded by Provenza.
Mr. Chairman, I don't really like going in and telling everybody what I'm planning on doing until I get a second, because that's the way we do this. I do have another amendment that'll go into a little bit further here that does, in fact, keep a little bit more of this intact, but it also provides a little bit better mechanism. That'll be the bigger amendment coming forward. But I do think that the mental health, in my opinion, is already covered underneath here in healthcare needs. But I do agree with the senator that outlining it very strategically and statute does provide that opportunity for parents and or students to recognize that mental health it's serious and we need to make sure it's seen as such.
Okay. Anybody got any comments? If not, proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Okay, that motion's been adopted. That amendment's been adopted.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Brown, please continue.
on lines 20, 21, 22, and 23, I would strike all new language and then on to page 3, striking the new language, and I'll just make that as my next motion.
Then moved and seconded that we strike all the new languages on lines 20, 21, 22, 23, and on page 3, line 1. Any discussion? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Just curious on why you want to strike that, or is it coming?
It's coming.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Question.
Not appearing, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed?
No.
It still is adopted. Moving on, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, this will be, and I will work with LSO when this comes forward, but this will be on page 3, line 9. This will be a new subsection underneath this paragraph. So right now you have paragraph 39. This would be a new subsection. And the new subsection would read, a district shall adopt a policy that provides a parent, and I'll go over this slowly, but I just want to make sure everybody hears it and as it will go. A district shall adopt a policy that provides a parent the ability to request a pre-approved excused absence. Pre-approved absences approved by the teacher and agreed to by the parent may include advanced coursework, testing, or any combination thereof. Due consideration of educational opportunities as well as student academic performance may be used as evidence to provide acceptance of a pre-approved absence. Nothing in this subsection shall require a district to pre-approve any absence. That's so moved, Mr. Chairman.
You want to hear it again? Or you got it?
I'll read it a little
Okay,
slower
we have
here.
it moved and seconded. Please go ahead.
All right. A district shall adopt a policy that provides a parent the ability to request a pre-approved excused absence. Pre-approved absences approved by the teacher and agreed to by the parent may include advanced coursework, testing, or any combination thereof. Due consideration of educational opportunities as well as student academic performance may be used as evidence to provide acceptance of a pre-approved absence. Nothing in this subsection shall require a district to pre-approve any absence. And Mr. Chairman, what I'm trying to do here is clean up a little bit of the language up above. I'm a little leery of the language that we have already struck, saying that, I don't like that we're putting that in there, that it shall not constitute an unexcused absence. I think that is too much of a heavy hand, in my opinion, from the state to force down on the local district. And so what I'm trying to do is say, hey, look, as a state, we recognize there are these issues that are out there. We need a mechanism for a parent underneath state law to say, hey, look, I'm trying to do the right thing here. I'm trying to give you advance notice and I'm trying to give you as much heads up as I can. Will you please help me? But it also says, hey, look, as a district, you trying to excuse your student for 26 days to go to, Jamaica is not an acceptable way to ask for a pre-approved absence. And so I think what we're trying to do there is balance the mix and the match of both parties. And I'll work with LSO to ensure, but that's the intent of the legislation or of the amendment. And I will say, I went out and worked with the sponsor of the bill. I am a co-sponsor on this bill and I do support what we're trying to do. And the sponsor of the bill looked at this and was amenable with this, so.
Questions on the amendment? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. So real quick. So it's pre-approved by the parent and the teacher. What about the district involvement in there? A principal, do we need to add the district involvement in that? Because I don't think a teacher can approve an absence.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
That's where the very first two words in this say a district shall adopt a policy. So the district will adopt that policy requiring which pieces of the components need to be in that acceptable policy. But what it does say is that the teacher and the parent can agree on coursework, testing, and any combination of those two to allow this to go through.
Anybody else? None appearing. Any more questions or any more comments? None appearing will proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
That amendment has been adopted also. You have more, sir?
Nope, I'm done now.
Representative Obermuller.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would be to strike all of the last amendment approved and go back up to line 3, page 2. And in the middle of line 3, strike the word and exchange with a comma. And then after willful absenteeism, add and parent or guardian requested absences, including for mental health, and draw this whole topic into the development of the policies at the district level. Or I mean, at the draw into these policies that the department is going to, the model rules, yes. I just think I think that's the place to consolidate all these issues. That, the testimony to us was that's probably where it belonged. And that's where I would like to see it. So that's the basis of my amendment.
Been moved. Thanks for a second. Okay. Moved by Obermuller, seconded by Clauston. You guys like to discuss it further?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In essence, I don't really have a problem with the amendment. I think that that's a good idea to include in this anyways, minus the striking of my beautiful amendment. I do think that it should be included up above as well. But I do think that providing in statute the opportunity for a parent to request a pre-approved absence is something we don't have. And we may have the opportunity, if you don't put it in statute and require that, a district just may not grant that. And so that's where I'm giving the opportunity for both parties inside of my beautifully crafted amendment to allow both parties to have that discussion. I do think, again, that having this included in the model policies is a great idea as well, but I'll be a no only because I like my amendment better.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
If the second on my amendment goes along with it, I would drop that deletion of your amendment and save the other part of it.
Yeah, there we go. Now
Okay.
we'll know that.
Everybody's happy.
Awesome.
More comments? None appearing will proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We've adopted that amendment also. Further amendments? Well, you'll see there's one that I have. So it's in your packet, should be on the back, I hope. Go to page 3, line 2. After absence, insert the wordage or the verbiage. The attendance officer shall notify the school principal and the guidance counselor of the name and grade of any student that has 5 or more absences due to mental health in any single year. This is just so that, and I won't explain it. Thank you. So now this is just so that when there turns out to be a student who has an accumulation of mental health absences, that somebody's notified within the district, the counselor is notified, somebody is there to take care and to look at that student and make sure everything's okay mentally. Any questions?
Question.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. We've adopted that amendment also. Diana, how did you do with the amendments?
Diana, I'll bring mine up to you.
We'll make sure to get with you before we leave. Okay. Any other comments or questions on the bill? Question being called, please. Representative Clauston, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, as this is a May policy, right now the school districts have to adopt it. Correct? Okay. Instead of putting this into statute, I mean, how do people feel about, we ask the superintendent to come up with best practices and policies and distribute those to school districts? Does this need to be put in statute? Or is this more again of a administrative function that we could ask the superintendent's office to put forward?
Come on up, Senator Ellis, and you can answer that question because you've been hammering this out for quite some time. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it does need to be in statute because I have had other instances where parents will look at what the state does on model policy in other areas. And so then they can say, oh, the state has model policy, and then they look at that and then they can compare it to what their district has. So it's a reference point for people that look at statutes and what's required. So I would leave that alone for what it's worth. And I just wanted to offer one thought. You know, we talk about this being a sausage making exercise of lawmaking. And I just want to say, like, I appreciate the work that's gone into it. I think it's made it a better bill, and just appreciate your thoughtful work on this because it is important. But I would, after all those amendments, maybe leave that piece alone and then add one thing about the HIPAA or the notifying people about absences due to mental health. Just maybe look and make sure that privacy protections, you know, make sure that's compliant with HIPAA and other student privacy laws. Just something to look into as you consider and advance that piece of it.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Senator. Any other comments? We'll proceed to vote. Please call a roll.
Okay, Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
Aye.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Clauston,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermuller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
9 ayes do pass with amendments.
Right, we're gonna move on to Senate File 47 committee. We've got 20 minutes to get through it.
We're out till 2:30.
Oh, we're out to 2:30. Oh, thank you. We gained a whole bunch of time.
Can I bring Dr. Jones up in an essence to save him time?
Yes, certainly. Please introduce yourselves.
Well,
Welcome to House Education.
good afternoon, Chairman Northrup, members of the new Education Committee. Senator Beitman, representing Senate District 21, Sheridan County. With me today is the good principal of Tongue River Middle School in good old Ranchester, Wyoming, my district. My girls go to his school. And we have for you today education repeal of immunity for corporal discipline, sponsored by the Joint Education Interim Committee. See a lot of new faces on this committee, so most of you didn't hear this during the interim, so that's why I'll have Mr. Jones talk about it. But what this bill does, walk you through this really long bill. It repeals one sentence in the current statute, and that sentence provides immunity from civil and criminal liability in the exercise of corporal discipline of a student as authorized by board policy. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones and he'll explain to you why this is needed.
Go ahead, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to speak to you today. My name is Jeff Jones, and I'm fortunate to be in my 30th year as a professional educator. For the vast majority of those 30 years, I've been called upon to support students with the most challenging chronic behavior problems. While I'm currently the principal at Tongue River Middle School in Ranchester, I'm not speaking on behalf of my school or my district. And to honor your time and to try to capture 3 years of work on this, I've condensed my thoughts into 3 or 4 minutes. Mr. Chairman, a bit of background. The roots of this bill started when I chose to tackle this topic in my doctoral dissertation. In May of 2021, I completed that dissertation entitled An Analysis of Wyoming Public School Administrators' Perceptions on the Use of Corporal Punishment in Wyoming Public Schools. For my study, I surveyed every Wyoming public school administrator that would be in a position to deliver school-level discipline. To the item, I believe corporal punishment should remain legal in Wyoming public schools. Nearly 90% of the administrators either disagreed or strongly disagreed. Also, when asked if they would accept a job where they were expected to administer corporal punishment, the administrators were nearly unanimous in saying no. Furthermore, to the item, if corporal punishment is to be used at all, I believe it is best left up to individual families within the confines of their home. The administrators, again, were nearly unanimous. One administrator perhaps put it best, stating, "It's pretty hard to teach keep your hands to yourself if we're not doing it when it comes to discipline." Mr. Chairman, prior to this study, only 10 of 48 school districts in public school districts in our state allowed corporal punishment as per board policy. After completing this study, I contacted the superintendent and the school board members of those 10 districts. The responses I received were similar. Most had no idea it was in their policy. I'm happy to report that as of this morning, only 3 districts still allow corporal punishment in their policy. I believe the time is coming when no districts will allow it in policy, whether this bill passes or not. Mr. Chairman, a couple important points of clarification about the current Wyoming statute, which reads, teachers, principals, and superintendents in each district shall be immune from civil and criminal liability in the exercise of reasonable corporal discipline. With all due respect to the terminology in the statute, the professional literature, along with the countless school board policies I've read from schools in Wyoming and throughout the country, correctly use the term corporal punishment, not discipline. Corporal punishment is an intentional form of physical discipline. To be clear, corporal punishment is defined as the deliberate infliction of physical pain, usually through hitting or using a wooden paddle as a penalty or consequence for disapproved behavior. While this bill is a good start, I have previously testified I think the language in this bill doesn't go far enough. In my judgment, corporal punishment should be prohibited in our public schools. However, I'm not sure an amendment at this point would even be possible, as it may be viewed as changing the original scope of the bill. Mr. Chairman, 20 years ago, when this same type of bill was brought before the legislature, the bill died. The reasons given according to interviews with the legislators at the time were that corporal punishment is not being used in Wyoming public schools, so there's no need for a bill. That was a different time in our society, and it may not be fair to judge decisions 20 years ago through the lens we have today. However, to take the same stance in 2023 would be to ignore a staggering amount of science showing the ineffectiveness of this practice. Research at this point is overwhelming, revealing that it is not only ineffective, but it frequently increases the likelihood of misbehavior in our most challenging students. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I suspect the legal protection of corporal punishment in Wyoming public schools has been afforded in an effort to honor local control. I actually respect that a great deal. I have supported local control for 30 years in education. However, I believe there are limits to what school districts should be allowed to do to the children in their care. When it comes to disciplining a child through corporal punishment, I believe the only local control that matters is that of the parent in the privacy of their home within the bounds of the law. If a child is to be paddled, the only person that should be doing that is the parent within the bounds of the law. School discipline has evolved in the last 100 years. We know better in 2023, and this bill will assure that we do better. I have an executive summary of my study that I can hand out. As a former teacher, I purposely didn't hand that out while I was speaking, just so I could keep your attention. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Mr. Chairman. Dr. Jones, I did watch the interim committee, education committee, once I knew I was going to be on education, and I really appreciated your testimony there. It really helped me clarify when I read the topic of the bill. I was like, what does this mean exactly? And I really appreciate you reiterating it today and coming today. I don't know if you have an opinion about this or not, but I would be curious if you do about the districts that still have it in their policy. Is your view that's more of a, we just have again not gotten around to straightening out policies, cleaning them up, and or is that sort of in any way you feel like a deliberate decision?
My phone's doing weird.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, I have spoken to all three of those districts. In one of the districts, the superintendent called me on my lunch break. I was doing lunch supervision and my cell phone rang. And he said, Jeff, I had no idea that was in our policy. Frankly, as of today, I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't changed yet because that's his intention to bring it to the board. In the other two situations, I've been told that it is going to the policy committee to be discussed. And so it's up for discussion. Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would it cause any problems if we made this act effective immediately?
Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Well, I'm not a legislator, so Mr. Chairman, I'm hesitating a little bit. I mean, the person who's been fighting for this bill for a long time is ready to say yes, yes, yes. And there's a part of me that, going back to the amendment, I feel like the correct language should be that it's prohibited, because essentially that's what the language is doing through this through this bill. With that being said, there's a lot of great momentum with this bill. And so if an amendment were even able to be added, I would not want to risk the momentum, because I think it's only a matter of time before another bill sponsored by another person sitting at this table would have that prohibited word in it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Representative Brown, are you good?
No, good.
Representative Brown, go ahead.
Senator Brightman, still pains me to say that, man. You should. Senator, you have a white bill right now on one page. I don't know how many of those happened. Do you want it to be a white bill that goes to the governor and is not engrossed and comes back to you?
Senator Biden.
Mr. Chairman, that's about as rare as a unicorn these days. And yes, that would be great. It'd be great. It's a pretty clean bill, straightforward. And like Dr. Jones said, we still might have some work to do on joint education to clean up the rest of this, but this is a great first step. Perfect. Thank you.
Further questions for Senator Brightman or Dr. Jones? Yep. Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Jones, real quick, I'm a special ed teacher and we've adopted the MANCH system. Some years we adopt CPI. You're still for those systems that are about de-escalating students, and in the very most severe cases, if we need to restrain a student, then you still about that, for that. This isn't taking that away, correct?
Go ahead, Dr. Jones.
Chairman Northrop, Representative Berger, absolutely. And actually, a model policy, or I should say statute, would be Montana. It clearly defines exactly what corporal punishment is, much to the definition that I read. And then it delineates how you might have to intervene in a physical situation to take control and keep people safe. They're very different. And so I think the language needs to be accordingly.
Follow up, go ahead.
Thank you. And I agree with that. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Further questions or comments for Dr. Jones or Senator Biden? Thank you. We'll take public comment. Would anybody in the audience like to comment on this bill? Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie. The Navy did away with flogging in 1862. I think time for Wyoming to catch up. They did retain bread and water. I found as a commanding officer that was a useless tool. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Bill Winnie? Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Public comment? Anything? Go ahead, Janine. I don't want to. Anybody online? It's all yours, Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Janine Bayteski from Teton County. To address Representative Provenza's comment, I would have concerns if you implemented it immediately. If you have 3 districts out there that currently do not have policies, you have to give them a chance to be able to get their policies in place, which between first reading and second reading needs to be a minimum of 45 days. So it would be problematic.
Questions for Janine? All right. Department has nothing to say. We're good. Thank you. We'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Provenza, seconded by Lawley. Committee?
I'd like to present a minute. No, I'm just kidding.
All right.
What would we do
without
without?
you? Well-
I've been wondering, what would we do without?
Does anybody have an amendment? Seriously.
Question.
Question being called. Let us proceed to vote on the bill.
Okay, Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
Aye.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Clouston,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermuller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
9 ayes do pass.
Thank you, committee. I guess we are adjourned. Yes, sir.
Do you have a sponsor to carry this one on the floor?